Before we get started in this episode, a quick announcement. As you know, I'm very passionate about acceptance and commitment therapy, and I also run a busy practice in Canberra. We're currently looking for psychologists who are registered in Australia to join our team, who are also passionate about learning about ACT. We provide supervision on a group and individual basis and training around ACT. So if this is you, if you're interested, please express your interest at strategicpsychology.com.au/careers. Look forward to hearing from you. And now back to this episode.
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking, yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
Welcome back to Better Thinking. My name is Nesh Nikolic, and today's guest is Professor Arnold Bakker. He's a professor in work and organisational psychology, and a very fascinating conversation today around work engagement, job crafting, playful work design. Never heard of that before, but it's fascinating about how we can get intrinsic value out of our work, even if it's boring. Job stress, burnout, and work-life balance. So lots of topics covered. Absolute brilliant mind. Hope you enjoy this episode. Arnold, a big thank you for coming onto the show.
Okay, happy to be here.
Lovely. I'm really excited about talking to you about this whole space around work and the many sort of aspects that probably a lot of us haven't even considered in work. The usual places, work-life balance, work stress, and burnout. But I know that you explore work in a very, very different way, and in your work, which is what really attracted me to reaching out and getting you on the show. So hoping to kind of go a little bit further than that. Let me ask you first, how did you get into this space, of organizational psychology and looking at work in the way that you do?
Well, maybe if I start with the real beginning, when I was at the high school, I was interested in people and in economy. And I thought that econometrics would be the study for me. So I started studying econometrics, but that was very much statistics and mathematics. So I'm very much into that, but and I can work with numbers very well, but I'm more interested in people. So I dropped out. I worked as a salesperson for 2 years, and then I continued to read, and I was attracted to academia back by reading about Freud. And Freud is passé, but it was very inspirational for me. So I went back to the university, started to study, and then I found out of this discipline called organizational psychology. So I actually studied organizational psychology, but also social psychology and methods. But then I specialized in studying people in organizations, and I really like it because what I find a little bit more difficult, so many of your listeners are into more the clinical scene, but what I find difficult with the clinical context is that sometimes it goes in ways that you cannot really control, let's say. I find that complicated. So I prefer to work with people who work, and that is not to say that they don't get into troubled situations. So I'm happy to work with them in that troubled situation, but it's not an extreme situation, let's say, for me to study people and to help people with new ideas, with interventions and so forth. Yeah.
It's fascinating because often when I'm hiring here in the practice, I often talk about the importance of there being a real strong synergy of, the practice and staff getting along with each other, and how we relate, because we spend so much of our time at work. I mean, I know it's not half our life if we do it by hour, but it must be very close to half of our, at least during the week life, or even our thinking life, because we're so in it. So I can see, your work being, very clinical in nature when we think about how much time we invest in that space. So it's exciting. It's exciting to talk about.
Yeah, I totally agree that and there is a philosopher. It's a Dutch philosopher, Achterberg. He used to say that work is a strange thing. It can make you sick, but it can also help you to feel okay. So work can be stressful, but it can give you also satisfaction, engagement. You can read certain things. It's important to many people, not only for earning a living, but particularly also to, let's use the word of self-actualization. So to get to doing something very well and to be proud on that. So I think in that sense, it's very, very important to many people. Part of our identity is based on it. And even if you are, or not even, but it doesn't matter if you are a professor or a plumber, I think that your identity is partly based on how well you do your work. And of course, there are always groups that just want to work and have a living and have some income. But for many people, it's much more than that. Yeah.
Certainly resonates for me, because I know personally work is a huge part of who I am. I mean, I love work. I love working hard. I identify as a hard worker. That's kind of who I am. And it's not necessarily the hours I work, in the office. If I'm gardening, I'm, sweating up a storm. I'm going at full, 100%. That's who I am. And maybe that's because I've seen my parents do that. They were migrants. They worked hard. That was their ethos, their ethics, their work ethic. And if I kind of look at my brother, he does exactly the same. So I can see how important it can be for some, at least, and probably a vast majority in actual fact. If we take the word paid work, because there's lots of parents out there who are full-time carers, full-time parents. I think they would argue that they're working too, right? And I would argue with them.
Yeah, well, work is a structured activity, and it applies to many things that are not paid for. So volunteer work would qualify, caring for other people qualifies, of course. If it is a structured activity, then you can qualify it as work. And what else can you say? Maybe through work you accomplish something that is maybe a defining characteristic of work. And then if that something has an impact on one person that you find very important, then you can have a major impact on that person, or could be your family, or could be your neighbor. But if you are doing work with which you can reach more people, you can have maybe even more impact. And I think, for many people that is important, and maybe partly even an existential question. So why am I here? To do something good, to have impact.
I like the idea of structured activity, and what you said in terms of being able to do more achievements, the satisfaction that comes from that. In so many ways is the whole reason why I have a practice. My logic is, if I see a client for that hour, I am impacting that one life, and maybe the ripple effect from that one life. And in a day, I might impact 6 people, and the impact I might have in their lives. But if I have a practice full of psychologists that I've supported and assisted and helped, that they can do their amazing work as a collective, it makes me feel like I'm achieving a whole lot more. Interestingly, though, when work is going hard, because I identify so much with it, it impacts me emotionally as well, which is something that's hard when it's bound in your identity so much.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I remember a saying by Elena Pines, a burnout researcher, who published a chapter in a book in 1993. And she said, in order to burn out, you first have to be on fire. So what it means is that if you are really identifying with your work and you're really into it, then you have also a lot to lose. So you could, for example, be so enthusiastically involved that you forget about your private life, or you take home the issues of your clients and your worries. so that it starts to interfere with your private life. And then if that hampers your other life domain, then you might be in trouble. So you would have work-family interference. You may start to behave more like a workaholic. And if you run into that habitual behavior, let's say, then stress will ensue. And if stress then accumulates, you may start to burn out and become exhausted by your work. So you have to regulate. You have to self-regulate. That is not easy, particularly if you're very enthusiastic, because you're really enthusiastic about what you do, you're dedicated, you have a lot of energy, and then you do your work with all this enthusiasm. But then, you can only peak if you also have lows. So you have to also detach from your work. Say, okay, this was the day, and now I'm going to do other things, so that the next day you are fresh again and you can peak again. Yeah.
What are the sorts of challenges that you see in your practice and research in those that are on fire? How do they, manage, or what are the pitfalls? What are the things to look out for?
Well, an interesting challenge is that if you're really good at something, okay, then, so I want to say this first, because it went through my head in 2 minutes ago. So first of all, I want to say that it reminds of the difference regarding happiness that Aristotle was already making. He was talking about hedonism and idomonia. So idomonia is that you feel good because of something you accomplish, and that is what you can really do through work. So you put in a lot of effort, and you do good things. So you accomplish something. So that is what work can do for you, and that could also be getting your garden ready for the summer or for spring and working very hard on it. So that gives you this feeling of having something accomplished. But then the challenge is that if you are good at something and you're successful, then more work will come to you. You will get more clients. You have more things to do, to publish, to talk to more clients and so forth. Then it will be harder to deal with the stress and the let's say the fatigue that comes with the job demands, by saying, okay, now I'm going to detach myself psychologically, or now I'm going to relax, because you're in this work mode. And what people often then do is they cope with the stress in a maladaptive way. So you start to avoid certain things, or you do things in a hurry. You start to make mistakes. So instead of adjusting the situation so that the stress is not accumulating, stress is accumulating, and therefore you run into more problems, because you start the next day already fatigued, and then you meet your clients and you don't come up with the best solution, or you're a little bit irritated, you don't have all the empathy that is needed to understand what the client needs or what your work problem needs. You're not creative, and then it goes from bad to worse. So so this regulation of fatigue, that is really difficult. So fatigue is, of course, a stop emotion. So if I'm really tired, that tells me, okay, now you have to stop. But if I overrule that continuously, then I might be in trouble. That is the problem of many people.
And what do you mean by fatigue? What's the understanding? Are we talking physical? Is it a lack of sleep? Is it an emotional? Is it sort of when we kind of, might be kind of like carers fatigue? What are you referencing? Can you talk us a little bit through that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's very complicated. So in the literature, what you see is that fatigue, people talk about it in different streams. So you have experimental psychology, where they see fatigue even as indicated by reduced performance. So when people start to perform less well, they say, okay, they are fatigued. Okay, yeah, for me as an organization psychologist, that's an outcome of fatigue. So the outcome of fatigue is lower performance, but fatigue is, yeah, there are many ways to go about this. It can be physical, so that you have certain physical symptoms in your body telling you, okay, you have to stop, or you cannot really move very well. Or there are physiological things happening in your body, like your cortisol levels are changing. That can be indications of fatigue. But then think about the time that you went running and you come back really fatigued, physically fatigued, but mentally you're fresh. So there is also, let's say, mental fatigue. So mental fatigue is more about that you have difficulties concentrating or keeping your switching attention flexibly, things like that. That's the second form. And the third form would, of course, be emotional exhaustion, where you cannot empathize anymore. You feel it difficult to control your emotions. And maybe there are more forms of fatigue. But the problem is, and we know all this, that there are different forms of fatigue, but they correlate like crazy. So if you want to study them and you want to separate physical from mental fatigue, what I try to do, for example, I study the impact of sport, let's say running, on feelings of burnout at work. And there is a relationship. If you do that moderately, run moderately and frequently, but not overdo it, and not start when you're already super burned out, then it helps to keep the fatigue levels okay. But I mean, the different types of fatigue, they really are intertwined. And so if you're high on physical fatigue, you're more likely to be also high on cognitive fatigue and on emotional fatigue. So that's a little bit of a problem, analytically.
And where does that, I know this might sound like a lazy question, but I think it's still an important question. Where does the fatigue come from? You know, like, is it how we're approaching our work? I mean, I think it's easy to say when someone's doing, 80 hours a week or 100 hours a week, we can all see that, your lack of sleep, and you're not putting enough attention on other areas of your life. That's easy to observe. But for the common person, who might be doing 40 hours or 45, where does that fatigue come from?
Yeah, that's actually, it's a tricky question. It's a tricky question. It's easy to say, oh, okay, I know where it comes from. But so many things go through my head. So first of all, let me start with the example of, how do you call these people who make streets and who work with stones?
Like stonemasons? Is it
Say it again.
Stonemasons?
Stonemasons. So imagine that I'm a stonemason and I'm 100 kilos. I'm 2 meters long, and I'm a heavy, strong person. Then for me, it will be easier to carry the stones than for a person who is 160 and who is, let's say, 70 kilo. So my fatigue will, so after carrying the same stones the whole day, I will be more fatigued as a lighter person than as a strong, heavy person. So the constitution, the physical constitution of different people is different. So that determines how much you can handle. So, okay, what happens then usually is that people select themselves out for certain jobs that they can handle. So if I'm 1.60 meters and I'm only 60 kilo, I'm a very light person, I'm not going to do this strong physical work, because that would fatigue me so much that, and I would make mistakes, I would drop the stones. That would not be my type of work. And the same goes for all kinds of jobs. So people usually go for and have ambitions in areas where they are good at, what they can do. But sometimes, of course, people want to do things that they shouldn't be willing to do, or they are not able to do. They want to make a career, let's say, as a politician. I just read a story early in the morning that a politician did something wrong and so forth. So that's why I was primed to think about it, this politician. And this politician did certain things in private lives that are completely not in line with what he should do, what he's doing as a public servant. So then, yeah, you're not doing what you should be doing. So there needs to be a fit between the person and the environment. And once you have selected yourself out as an accountant in an accountancy firm, and you're good in numbers, and you can concentrate, and you have this education, and you have a certain amount of introversion to be able to go through the staple of bills and things to do, and you like this, okay. But then you have selected yourself out. There is a person-environment fit. But then it's all about, and that is what our theory says about job demands and resources, the demands in your environment and the resources in your environment. And what I mean with demands are things like work pressure, the clients that come with certain issues, demanding customers, mentally straining complex problems, all the things of work that are costing energy. That is what I call job demands, and we can deal with a lot of it. And if we do so, we perform well. But in order to be able to deal with these job demands, we need job resources. So we need things like social support. We need autonomy, that we can decide on our own when we will do something or how we exactly will do something. So autonomy is an important job resource. Feedback is a job resource. Supervisory coaching is a job resource. So the combination of demands and resources helps you to avoid fatigue, to stay well at work, and then to perform well. That is what we find, but that is after having selected yourself out for a certain job.
I'm assuming that when there is an imbalance, is assuming that person and environment fit has been accounted for. At that point, it's a balance between the demands and resources. And I'm assuming each person is probably looking for something unique to them. That is kind of like a particular recipe for each of us as to how much our manager provides us with, or autonomy or feedback or coaching, social support, and that'll be different to my colleague who might want more or less of each of those, so to speak.
Yeah, so that's a very good that's a very good point, Nesh. So actually, your colleague who might want more of these job resources could do two things. You could either say, okay, this is not the place to be. I want to work in another organization where more of these job resources are provided for the demands that I have to deal with. So I'm going to look somewhere else. I'm looking for another job. Or what we have seen in our research in the past 11, 12 years on job crafting, that is that people can proactively look for these resources themselves. So you can ask for support. You can go to your manager and say, give me some feedback. Or you can ask for more responsibilities or start a new project. So you're, of course, to a certain extent, you are free to mold the work such that it fits better with your maybe changing preferences. So, for example, you have this personal environment fit when you get into an organization. If you're lucky, if you made the right choice and the organization made the right choice, there's a good fit. Your qualifications fit with the job. But then over time, the job changes, you change, and there's going to be a misfit. So you always need to work on your environment and on yourself in order to stay engaged. That is what our work shows.
So that's what you mean by job crafting, that you changing the job, altering the job, creating iterations of what it first was to maybe 2.0, 3.0 to suit one's person, and so as the person changes, even though the environment was a fit, it no longer is, and it needs to kind of move with them.
Exactly.
Or it might be preemptive, that it creates enough variability or change or challenge that tends to fit for that person.
Exactly. So you can always also, if you always do your work in the same way, it might after a while not be challenging anymore. But who stops you from starting to do your work in a slightly different way, or by using talents that you have? Maybe you've developed them in your free time. You're a very creative person. You work in a job where creativity is not really necessary, but you can start using your creativity in your work and do your work in a slightly different way. And if you do so, then by using your strengths, since you are super good at it, you will probably be successful. And that success will then drive your performance. It will give you confidence. It will fuel your engagement. So yeah, I think it's very important that you find out where you are good at, where your passion is, and then use that to do your work maybe slightly in a different way. And we've seen now with, at least in most places in the world with COVID-19, that we needed to adjust our work. And many people needed to start to work from home, to meet people through Zoom or other video conferencing tools. And we are coping relatively well with it, actually. So we hear stories that many people are depressed, and of course, a lot of things are happening. But if I look over time, we have assessments of 1.5 years ago. We have assessments during in the height of the COVID crisis, and I don't see big drops in engagement. I don't see super big increases in burnout. Maybe if it continues like this for a few more years, we may be really in trouble. But at the moment, I think that people, they are really adjusting. They are crafting their jobs. They're doing things differently, and they make the best of it. That is, of course, a very healthy way of coping.
I foolishly jumped the gun in my mind and thought that people would quickly adapt to trying to return back to work rather than working from home. Well, my apologies. I thought that organisations would strongly push for people to come back to work, for productivity point of view and the like. Do you have any data in that space as to how has this sort of COVID world changed people's, whether it be satisfaction or productivity levels, or autonomy going up? How is feedback sort of occurring? What's been your experience? Coming from a place that's more learned rather than me just jumping the gun and just having an opinion.
Well, yeah, I think you are really lucky in Australia, because I've seen, I collaborate with people in Adelaide, and I've seen that there is much more freedom to move than we have here at the moment. But anyway, I think that in many places in the world, it's maybe nice to refer to a paper that we wrote for American psychologists with a team of 29 authors from organizational psychology and management about COVID-19 and the workplace. So people can look it up. I think it's freely accessible. Otherwise, you can find it on my website, arnoldbakker.com. And what we see is that with COVID-19, okay, this has, of course, a lot of challenges. So there are certain new demands, like I was referring to, job demands, things that cost you energy, like you have to learn to deal with digital media. You're working, we are running along in a big study at my university, Erasmus University in Rotterdam. We follow my colleagues over time, and we see that the biggest demand is that they work solitary, that they find that they experience social isolation. They feel alone because everybody's at home alone. The work pressure is still high. But the title of our report to the board of our university was still hanging in there. So we are okay, let's say. But what I also see in research, we have published several papers about it, studying people during COVID-19. We see that the proactive behavior, what is needed to be engaged, becomes even more important now that we are alone, working at home. We cannot meet so easily our colleagues and friends with whom we work. So proactivity, self-starting behavior has become more important. And if you do so, then you can really accomplish a lot of things. That is what we noticed.
And I know this might not be very scientific, but what do you think is going to happen after, post-COVID? Do you see there being this natural, I'm just theorizing here, natural desire for us to be social, that predominant sort of attitude or understanding is that we're a social being, that we want to go back into the workplace? Is it going to be driven by workplaces kind of saying, we want you back because that's where we see productivity and collaboration? What do you think is going to happen? Obviously, we're just theorizing, but what do you see?
I see there is also some discussion about that in the popular media about management consultants, and I've spoken to many people who work in practice. I think that most people think that we will have a blended reality in the future. So we will partly work from home, let's say most people think 3 days a week if you are a white collar worker, and 2 days go to the office to meet people, to have meetings, to meet people in a kind of cafeteria. You don't need your normal workspaces. That is the feeling that people have. Also, your question reminds me of the following. We bought a new house, and the house is next to a big park in Utrecht, where I live. And so we are in the middle of COVID-19. We have people cannot go to work unless you are working in a hospital or you have a vital occupation, as they say. So you need to deliver goods, supermarkets, and so forth. These people work, but most people work at home. So we had a very nice day, very sunny day, early in the spring. I think it was beginning April or end of March. It was fantastic, 22 degrees Celsius. And the park, it was packed with people. Everybody was there. People were barbecuing, people were drinking, partying. So I think what will happen after we are all vaccinated, people will enjoy as much as possible. They will start to travel more than before. So we say, okay, we will probably travel less. No, I don't think so. I think we will travel more and pretty fast. Maybe in the beginning it will be slow because we are still a little bit afraid, but then we get more than back to normal. We get over the top. And I've read about stories what happens after major events like wars and so forth. Then people really want to celebrate. They want to be together and to do crazy stuff. And we are now so confined to small areas and our own home and so forth. So in addition to willing to go to work, but then not 5 days a week, probably 2, maybe 3 days a week go to on location. But I think people will start to move a lot and have a lot of new initiatives, start to invest their money. I think there will be a lot of engagement and enthusiasm. Yeah.
Almost like a compensatory effect of really appreciating what they did have and therefore grabbing more of it because they might have taken it for granted, and kind of recognizing that there's real importance in having those and compensating them to have more of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can.
In Australia, there's a lot of things, and obviously Australia is a bit of a bubble, and a lot of our listeners are Australian, but Australia's a bit of a bubble in that we've been very mildly affected by COVID as a whole. There's certainly been some regions, there's been some strong lockdowns and the like, but if I speak over the last several months and maybe even longer, we're quite, in some sense, non-affected in many ways. And our economy, at least it appears, and I can't obviously speak for every region, but it just seems like it's gone berserk. Caravans are, you're being sold, and if you put in an order, it's going to take 6, 8, 9, 10, 12 months to get it. People are buying pools, and not everyone obviously, but cars are going like hotcakes, and people buying bikes, a lot of gym equipment and cycling and camping, going the outdoors. There's a lot of stimulation, and obviously huge government spending and stimulation, but it seems like there's been a bounce back that I certainly wouldn't have predicted. I thought, doom and gloom, it's all broken, everything's finished, it's a crisis, and I don't know, I still scratch my head and look around, and I know we're in a bubble, but it's like, it sounds like what you're predicting is not only going to be an Australian thing, but delayed in other countries when it's a better handle on the situation might happen as well.
Yeah, I can relate to it. It is indeed illustrative of what I'm predicting, but still, I know. I've been to Australia a few times, and I know that people, you have a fantastic country, you can go out with caravans and you can travel and do things. But I think because you are a country with many immigrants and with a lot of people having family overseas, I think there are a lot of people who are really longing to go abroad, to travel, and they probably think that Australia is a small country and that they are confined to a certain region, only their own country, even though you have a massive continent. I know that. But I remember, because I've been a visiting professor in Hong Kong, and I went every year for 3 weeks. And after 2 weeks, I felt really like as if it were a cage. So you want movement, you want to be able to go around. And at least only the thought that you can go on a plane or you can go wherever you want anytime, that gives you such a fantastic feeling. And now we cannot do that. So we compensate by running a lot, by being outdoors, by hiking and so forth. And of course, it's super nice. But still, we miss the other cues, the other adventures and experiences, and our family. My wife is Greek, and we have not been in Greece for 1 year. So that's difficult.
Yeah. I know many of my colleagues, friends, we've all had plans at some point in these 2 years of traveling, and clearly they've all been on hold. So I think there's going to be a huge rush when all the airline companies, I know that probably governments around the world are propping them up at the moment, but they will become extremely profitable in no time when we get around to it. Just a quick question, something that I wanted to touch on. It's a little bit of a segue, not a nice one, but not nice, but not a clear one. Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean by playful work design? It's something that I wanted to make sure that we cover, that attracted me. I'm interested about what does that mean. I'm forever looking at how we can improve our work conditions in the practice, and I know that I love the idea of being playful, and I'm very playful in my therapy. I'm very playful with my children, so just that word kind of jumps out at me. So what's meant by that?
Playful work design. I'm very happy that you asked it, Nesh. This is my favorite topic at the moment. So we started working on this about 5-6 years ago, when I went to a conference in Estonia, and I gave a keynote for a group of people, 600 people, HR managers. But the organizers, they had another agenda as well. They wanted to talk to me, and one of the organizers was into a business where they were into gamification. gamification. So I had a lot of conversations and beers with the people to talk about gamification. And then, so it's not gamification, playful work design. Gamification is that companies, they put in, let's say, all kinds of games in the environment at work, a ping pong table, ping pong tennis table. You can have PlayStation or whatever kind of device that you can use in between your work, for example. That would be gamification. With playful work design, we say this is something that people do themselves. So it is defined as proactively changing the experience of work by making it more fun or more competitive. So it's not job crafting. Job crafting is proactively changing your work environment, your job demands and resources. And playful work design is doing the same work, but doing it in a different way. So, for example, this conversation during this podcast, Nesh, I could make it more playful to myself by telling myself, okay, you need to use during this conversation a very difficult word that doesn't make sense at all. I could make it super playful by suddenly saying to you a word, you say, huh? What is he talking about? So I would then grab your attention. I would make it interesting and exciting for myself. Or I could ask you 3 questions. Yeah, you are the person asking me questions, I know that. But I could start asking you questions and see how you deal with it. During a meeting, you can try to make people laugh. If you have to deal with 300 emails, you can try to make a competition with yourself and say, okay, the next hours I'm going to get rid of at least 30. So you set a clock and try to break your own record. That is playful work design. I do it by making my PowerPoints as beautiful as possible. So I use special software to make every slide look fantastic. So it can be done in many different ways. I had in one workshop, we had a pilot, and he said, I'm working playful by saving kerosene by flowing and flying on the air streams, let's say. So I'm trying to save kerosene by going on the air streams. And also I try to be exactly on a certain time in the time slot that I have, and I have to be at the airport. I try to be exactly at that moment at the airport. So this is making your work more playful, and by making it more playful, you make it more interesting. You can fight boredom. You can get rid of some stress because you make it more meaningful. By using fun, you create some cohesion with your colleagues. So using fun would be another way to make it playful. So there are many different ways, but 2 categories: creating fun and designing your work to be a little bit more competitive, not with others, but with yourself.
So it's quite intrinsic in nature. You're finding something that whether it be novel or different, a challenge, playful, enjoyable, that you're in some sense doing with yourself, and you may share it with someone or may not, but it's something that you're doing that is proactive. So exactly. That if work is becoming stale, you're changing it even though it's the same job.
Exactly. So you might have repetitive work as a cashier in a supermarket, but then try to use a fantasy to imagine what the story is behind every customer. Or you're an accountant and you have to take care of a lot of bills and it's all numbers and it's starting to become boring. But you can try to imagine what is behind all the numbers, the stories that are behind it. And this fantasy would help you to make your day more engaging, more interesting, and you would probably work a little bit harder. So you get yourself going, you make it interesting, and this is actually what I later realized. I've read the work of Csikszentmihalyi, who is known for his work on flow. Many people who experience this state of getting completely immersed in activities, they make it playful. So if you go back to his books from the 90s, then you see that he has many qualitative examples of actually what we are studying now quantitatively, that people make their work or their environment, they make it more playful.
How do you study playful, work design? How do you go about seeing obviously going from a theory and an idea to putting some, quantitative data to it? How do you do that?
Well, as I said, we started 6 years ago. So first we conceptualized, we said, okay, what is all in there? And it was a lot of things in there. And we said, okay, let's just collect a lot of examples. So we made 200 items, examples of how people make their own work more playful. So then we used the 200 items and we asked, I think it was about 10 experts to look at each of the items, whether they were clear, whether they found the items indicative of something. So we tried to collect already some data. And then we chose the best items in terms of validity, in terms of whether they were clear, in terms of whether they could be discriminated. And then the selection of items that we had from that, I think that must have been around 30 or so. We gave those items to 300 people. Then we did a factor analysis to see the structure of the items, whether they clustered. And then we found several clusters, but the basic clusters were designing your work to be more fun and designing your work to be more competitive. And then we reduced it. We made 2 scales of 6 items. And that we used in now, I think, maybe 10 new samples. It's also used in Israel. It's used in Greece, in Italy, Mexico, many different places. Data are now collected. So we have evidence for a scale that is valid, that is reliable. So then you can use the scale to find people in organizations who do this. And we link it also to work engagement and performance. We see that people who do this are more creative, for example. We see that there are effects over time. We have learned that particularly people who are playful by nature and open to new experiences, they are really good at this. We see that you can use it to deal with boring work situations, but also with very emotional situations. Particularly the fun part can be used to smoothen the tension, for example, a bit. And then we track the people who are really good at this, at playful work design in organizations. We use their examples then in interventions where we teach the other people in the organization to do it in the same way. So we started with qualitative research, we made it quantitative, we followed then people over time in diary studies, in longitudinal survey studies, and now we are doing interventions with consultants. We also have pre-tests, post-tests, and we find effects of this, also experimental effects.
And what are those 6 skills? What are those 6 primary domains that
there are two basic domains.
Fun and competitive.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
2 basic domains, and but you can see that there is a certain nomological network around the concept of playful work design. So, for example, the people who are designing your work to be a little bit competitive, like working against the clock or beating the clock, beating your own personal record, or getting rid of 30 emails in 1 hour. These are the people who are by nature a little bit more achievement oriented. Or people who have a creative personality, they are more likely to use fantasy and to use fun as a redesign principle. So you can see that certain personalities are more likely to do this. But then if you look at work situations where people use it, it can be a surgeon. So, okay, a surgeon, there is a life at stake. Can you use playful work design? Well, you can try to do it as neat and as good and precise as possible, to make as few mistakes as possible. That is the competition that surgeons do. And if you work at an assembly line, you can try to do things as fast as possible, or as efficient as possible, or use your fantasy. And there's a little bit less at stake there. But so people use it in all layers of work that you can find. Yeah, very nice research, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you're rattling off some of those, they're just kind of jumping out at me. I've done, lots of repetitive jobs
Do you do it?
in my life.
Do you use it?
Yeah, look, I'm the industrious one, so high conscientiousness. So for me, it's competition with widgets per minute, per second, per hour, per something, and it's always about running faster. But or it could be quality, precision. There's always something, perfectionistic sort of world is where I live. How about you? What do you tend to lean towards?
Well, one of the things I wanted to say that we use this playful work design concept now also in the sports domain. So I'm a runner. And we developed now a new concept called playful sports design, which you can apply to any sports, but also to running. And with running, I've noticed, you can of course go always the same roads, but you can also take side tracks, or you can try to move differently using different types of music. That's what people do. People try to reach the next or the every 10th tree that they meet in the forest, or there are many different strange playful ways that you can go about when it comes to sports, and particularly when it comes to training, because when you are in a competition, you need to score or you need to get this record or whatever. But in training, which is very repetitive, we've seen that people use this a lot. And I find it fascinating because it makes the things that you do in a structured way, so sports is one of them, work is another one, you can make it more meaningful, more interesting, you can be more persistent, and it can help you. We have one paper in the Canadian psychologist showing that if you use playful work design, you can better deal with your ruminative thoughts about COVID-19. So ruminative thoughts about COVID-19 is related to depressive complaints and to exhaustion, but not so for people who use playful work design. So if you distract yourself by making your work more playful, then you don't think all the time about the crisis that we are in. So that is an interesting, a fun finding that we have done, and I think it's also very relevant.
Yeah, I think it's in some sense, maybe the next frontier in looking at how we do our work, where a lot of us are stuck in a job, and irrespective of maybe moving from one company to the other, there's a commercial reason that we have to kind of maintain a particular or a lifestyle we've got that maintains a particular type of work, and so it's not that easy to pivot away from it. But there, what you're saying is there's really a opportunity for us to do something intrinsically to make that different. Arnold, I could talk to you for hours, and I'm so intrigued, particularly around this playful work design, which I'm going to go out and research a whole lot more now. Where can people find out a little bit more about you and maybe some of the topics that we've covered today?
Yeah, that's nice that you ask it, Nesh. So people can find out more about my work at my website, which is arnoldbakker.com. So it's Baker with double K, arnoldbakker.com. And I have put there under the dimension of articles, I've put PDFs of all my articles. So most of them are in English, and they are I've put them there for freely available. And so if you're interested in job crafting, playful work design, burnout, or all the topics we talked about today, you can find them there. Yeah.
That's fantastic, and very generous of you as well to make all of those available, because I know there's often, those firewalls that require payments and the like, and I think great work needs to be shared and utilised, and I'll certainly be taking some of these conversations through to my clients. So watch out, clients, next week. We're going to be having a good chat about, how does your work look and the intrinsic things you can do about that. It's certainly something I haven't actually thought about before. So, I've taken a lot from this. So I appreciate it. And obviously, making those resources available, I think, is extremely generous.
Thanks, Nesh. It's really nice to be in your show.
Arnold, thanks again for your time. I'm cognizant of the time. If we didn't have a hard stop and other obligations, I'd pick your brain for a few more hours. But thanks again for your time and your expertise. And we wish you the best. And next time you're in Oz, say hello. Come to Canberra.
Okay, will do. Have a nice day.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please support it by going to iTunes and putting a review, subscribe, share it via social media, and tell others about it. Start a conversation. It's listeners like you that make this able and possible, and why we bring in these guests to go out and share their knowledge and resources. And just lastly, if you are a psychologist and you want to go out and be part of a bigger team, develop your experience and get into some exciting work, come to strategicpsychology.com.au/careers and reach out. I'd love to hear from you.